come dire, cercare di dare una certa idea di se stessi. Io ho chiamato la visibilità la costruzione dell'egemonia del senso comune. Che cosa vuol dire? Far sì che diventi una cosa di senso comune che Sorrentino è un bravo docente, un brillante relatore, oppure che il presidente degli Stati Uniti sia una persona giusta, democratica o buona, o che Papa Francesco sia accogliente, aperto e inclusivo, no? Ognuno di noi cerca di vendersi, di proporsi al meglio e cerca di dare di sé l'immagine migliore, no? Allora, che ne so, se noi parliamo di un fenomeno come quello immigratorio, ci saranno alcuni soggetti che avranno interesse a far sì che nel senso comune si sia convinti che il fenomeno migratorio sia un fenomeno giusto da accompagnare, perché bisogna essere solidali e perché probabilmente i migranti ci risolvono anche dei problemi economici. Mentre invece se sono razzista, nazionalista, eccetera, 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 io cercherò di imporre il senso comune che i migranti sono un pericolo, perché ci vogliono islamizzare, perché sono dei terroristi, perché non considerano le donne, perché ci verranno a violentare tutti. Ognuno di questi due pensieri cerca di affermarsi. E che cosa ha prodotto la rete? La rete ha prodotto, internet ha prodotto che questi processi di costruzione di visibilità oggi li possiamo giocare tutti. Qualsiasi fonte attraverso la rete può costruirsi un proprio racconto. Voi avete sentito parlare, in Italia va molto di moda, ma credo anche qui, il concetto di storytelling. Che cos'è lo storytelling? Lo storytelling è proprio una narrazione per fare sì che la gente sia convinto che quello che io sto raccontando sia bello, giusto, vero, fico, ganzo, che funzioni. Ma nello stesso tempo sulla rete sappiamo che ciascuno di noi può costruire il proprio storytelling, sia parlando di se stesso, sia postando per esempio articoli, contributi, poesie, foto di altri che ci sembrano rilevanti. Una cosa, ma ripeto, parlo ad un pubblico esperto e quindi dico una banalità, una cosa che sta, e ne parleremo anche dopo, no? Una cosa che sta succedendo oggi è chiunque diventa produttore di cultura, no? Nella relazione di dopo vedremo come anche come dire, i musei d'arte contemporanea, cioè quei luoghi di conservazione e valorizzazione e distribuzione, oggi sono diventati, forse non prioritariamente, ma significativamente dei luoghi di produzione culturale. Ma pensate per esempio questo, questo poi ce ne parlerà Victor nella seconda parte, sta stravolgendo il giornalismo. Io anche come José, come Manolo e come Victor studio prevalentemente il giornalismo. Che cos'è il giornalismo? Il giornalismo non sono le news, non sono le informazioni. Il giornalismo è un contenitore, è un recipiente. Per qualche secolo questo contenitore veniva costruito esclusivamente da dei professionisti che noi abbiamo chiamato periodisti, giornalisti, eccetera, eccetera. Oggi in Europa circa un terzo, ed è un numero che cresce di giorno in giorno, di persone accede alle notizie attraverso il proprio profilo Facebook. Quindi vuol dire che il contenitore non è più il País o il Mondo o il New York Times, ma il contenitore diventa Carlo Sorrentino, diventa José López, diventa Victor, diventa ciascuno di noi. Quindi questo vuol dire stravolgere totalmente la struttura logica dei processi giornalistici. Ma allora voi mi direte, tu ci stai dicendo che quindi i giornalisti sono finiti? Il periodismo è morto? Morto? Dead? No, vi sto dicendo che bisogna build sharing, bisogna costruire condivisione, cioè bisogna dialogicamente costruire dei contesti di consapevolezza dove elaborare processi interpretativi comuni. Proprio perché abbiamo questa enorme ricchezza, noi abbiamo un enorme bisogno di qualcuno che ce la metta in ordine, ma in una forma completamente diversa dal passato. Il periodista del País, del Mondo, di Telecinco o di quello che volete, era un ordinatore, qualcuno che ci metteva in ordine le cose. Oggi quella modalità di messa in ordine è andata a farsi friggere, è stata superata. E allora però noi abbiamo ugualmente bisogno di qualcuno che svolga questa funzione di messa in ordine. Questa funzione di messa in ordine viene svolta da quella che io chiamo, non soltanto io, altrimenti non starei nemmeno a dirvelo, intermediari culturali. O per usare un termine che è molto più cool sulla rete, gli influencer. Chi sono gli influencer? Gli influencer sono sicuramente i giornalisti, ma sono tanti altri gli influencer. Pensiamo per esempio a quello che sta succedendo anche in Spagna, proprio nella comunicazione politica, ma sta succedendo in tutto il mondo. Perché vanno in crisi i partiti tradizionali e dei signori che fino a ieri avevano soltanto, come dire, un blog, un sito internet che funzionava, diventano come dire, dei leader di partito, in Italia Grillo, il Movimento 5 Stelle, che è il secondo partito in Italia, in Spagna Podemos e anche altri, insomma, no? Perché sostanzialmente sono riusciti a fare quelle due cose che vi ho detto prima. Sono riusciti a fare molto bene building reputation, costruire reputazione, e defining the situation, e definire la situazione in maniera che ci appare credibile. Lasciamo stare se sia giusto o non giusto, se ci piace o meno, non è quello di cui dobbiamo parlare, ma ci sembrano credibili e ci sembrano dei buoni ordinatori, dei buoni intermediari culturali. Joseph Nye è un famosissimo politologo americano, quello che ha inventato il concetto di soft power, ma è anche stato un ministro dell'amministrazione Clinton. Raccontava qualche anno fa ad un convegno di come fosse molto più complicata oggi costruire l'opinione pubblica, no? Diceva prima, se tu volevi farti approvare una legge, dovevi parlare, dovevi definire la legge, poi parlavi con 4-5 lobbisti e l'avevi risolto. Diceva Joseph Nye, oggi, e lo diceva prima che nascesse internet, oggi esistono per ogni issue 1000 ONG, organization non governative, insomma, no? Per cui tu devi convincere un numero incredibile di persone. Questo processo di mediazione è diventato molto più complesso, molto più articolato, insomma, no? Come il nostro comune amico Giorgio Grossi, che è un mio collega italiano che Victor conosce bene e che secondo me è il più lucido studioso di questi fenomeni in Italia, ci insegna in un volume che credo sia stato tradotto anche in spagnolo. Non so come si chiama in spagnolo? La misma. Ecco, l'opinione pubblica oggi è molto più difficile da costruire e perché è più difficile? È più difficile, e mi avvio alla fine perché sta finendo il tempo a mia disposizione, proprio perché si è costituita questa sfera pubblica densa di cui vi ho parlato all'inizio. questa arena multiforme in cui convivono una quantità enorme di istituzioni, movimenti, partiti di tradizioni secolari, associazioni e organizzazioni non governative che ridisegnano i processi di formazione dell'opinione pubblica, ognuno articolando abilità differenti per conquistarsi il proprio spazio. In tutto questo però ci dobbiamo mettere, ed è l'ultimo tassello del mio discorso, il fatto che in questa negoziazione oggi un ruolo molto più importante ce lo abbiamo anche ciascuno di noi, proprio perché, per quello che vi dicevo, non soltanto per quello che vi dicevo. Io prima vi ho detto, mio figlio ha 23 anni, cioè l'età di molti di voi, non l'ho mai visto con un periodico in mano, ma è molto più informato di me. Ma come si informa? Si informa soprattutto attraverso i social network, quindi soprattutto attraverso comunità che ha contribuito a costruire con i propri amici, fidandosi di intermediari che non sono più il direttore del Corriere della Sera o di Repubblica. Poi moltissime informazioni attraverso come voi sapete bene, attraverso il profilo di Facebook. Che cosa postiamo? Postiamo il video che prendiamo da Sky oppure da una TV pubblica mainstream, o dalla CNN oppure dal Jazeera, oppure da un periodico, da un giornale importante. Però costruiamo un bouquet informativo assolutamente diverso dal passato. Quindi ciascuno di noi non consuma, ma riproduce, condivide, valuta e fa valutare informazioni. Questo che cosa produce? Produce quello che io chiamo un cittadino, io lo chiamo cittadino esigente, demanding citizen. Vi ricordate, prima vi ho detto che cos'è la cittadinanza? La cittadinanza è pensare con la propria testa, tu puoi pensare con la propria testa soltanto se hai esperienze del mondo, esperienze plurime del mondo. Oggi internet ti dà questa possibilità, ma proprio perché te ne dà troppa, fa sì che ciascuno di noi poi si rinchiuda nella propria vita privata. Che cosa sono i social network? I social network soprattutto di assicurazione, che, come dicevo prima, sui social network noi dialoghiamo soprattutto con un numero circoscritto di altri. Però in qualche modo scegliamo noi, o abbiamo l'impressione maggiore di scegliere noi, i nostri interlocutori, cioè coloro che ci disegnano i frame, che ci disegnano le cose che per noi sono importanti. Ma per tutti i motivi che io vi ho detto, noi abbiamo un esigente perché un cittadino ha un rapporto superficiale intermittente con l'informazione, ma comunque continuo interessato con tantissimi temi. Sono probabilmente meno informati del cittadino ben informato, hanno un maggior numero di informazioni anche se probabilmente non sanno gestirle. Allora, che cosa bisogna fare per cercare di far sì che questi tre soggetti che io vi ho descritto, le fonti, gli intermediari culturali e i cittadini, tornino a costruire un dialogo funzionante? C'è bisogno di radicare percorsi di reputazione, di fiducia condivisa. E come lo si può fare? In rete lo si può fare soltanto in un modo molto semplice, che è quello alleanza tra le parti. Voi che poi un po' quello che diceva già un paio di decenni fa, Pierre Lévy, quando parlava di intelligenza collettiva. Che cos'è l'intelligenza collettiva? È la possibilità potenziale che noi abbiamo di convocare saperi che sono dispersi in varie parti del mondo. Come voi forse sapete, oggi gli scienziati, soprattutto nelle cosiddette scienze dure, nella fisica, nella chimica, nella matematica, stanno risolvendo una serie di quesiti che fino ad ora non erano stati risolti, proprio perché attraverso internet hanno la possibilità di convocare una quantità di informazioni, di studi, di ricerche su quel determinato problema fino allora non convocabile. E quello che dobbiamo fare sostanzialmente è cercare di passare da una visione che finora è stata
sia il processo di disintermediazione. Lei pensa si funziona della stessa maniera a livello lontano o prossimo?
È chiaro.
Sì.
Ma come funziona la disintermediazione in realtà lo sappiamo ancora molto poco, perché la disintermediazione può essere vista almeno in due direzioni diverse. La prima direzione, lo dicevo ora nell'ultima parte del mio intervento, la prima ingenua visione è stato che la disintermediazione sconfiggesse come posso dire, proprio l'intermediazione culturale. Da una parte noi abbiamo delle fonti che riescono a dirci tutto quello che vogliono dire, dall'altra parte abbiamo ciascuno di noi che può arrivare dappertutto. Ma da tutto quello che vi ho raccontato, sostanzialmente i processi di conoscenza non sono così immediati, perché immediati sono le informazioni, ma gli studiosi di conoscenza sanno bene che tra l'informazione e la conoscenza ci sono, come dire, c'è un oceano in mezzo, insomma, no? Allora io, singolo individuo, posso andare a prendermi quelle informazioni, ma spesso e volentieri non so che farmene, non le so leggere, noi diciamo non so attribuirgli significato. Ho bisogno di qualcuno che mi attribuisca significato. Questi attributori di significato sono gli intermediari culturali. Ma gli intermediari culturali devono capire che però non possono costruirmi il significato come hanno fatto finora, impacchettarmelo nel programma di un partito politico oppure nella copia quotidiana del País o del Mondo o nella mezz'ora di telegiornale, no? Devono capire che quel significato lo devono costruire anche insieme a me, consumatore. Quando io parlo di alleanza, so di star parlando di una cosa molto difficile, infatti non avviene in nessuna parte del mondo, ma la capacità che ho io ora di, io intermediario culturale, di convocare nel mio processo di costruzione il mio ascoltatore. Nel giornalismo sta succedendo a un livello molto banale. Se voi andate sulla colonnina sinistra dei siti, destra dei siti, trovate Sunshine, Little Cat, Gattini, Mulier desnude, corretto? Now anche ombre desnudi, perché tutto questo sappiamo provoca tanti click, ma questo è un livello molto basico di costruzione di significato. Dobbiamo arrivare a una capacità convocativa più elevata, ma non parliamo soltanto di giornalismo. Faccio un altro esempio che è proprio il mio mestiere, quello di José, di suo, di molti di noi qui dentro. Noi ancora non abbiamo capito, almeno noi in Italia, in Spagna non lo so, che il nostro mestiere anche, così come lo abbiamo inteso, è finito. In Spagna chiamate i professori ordinari cattedratici, perché stanno in cattedra. La lezione cattedratica non funziona più, perché la vostra generazione di cattedratico non ha mai visto niente nella vita, proprio perché, ripeto, di cattedratico non hanno avuto mai il rapporto con i propri genitori, nemmeno con il proprio Dio, come ho detto prima, ma è tutto molto meno vertical e muy horizontal, come orizzontale, no? Allora anche io, docente intermediario culturale, devo pensare una metodologia didattica che sia molto più convocativa. Ti devo in continuazione chiedere: ma tu che ne pensi? Ma tu che ne dici? Ma secondo te è così? Se io faccio, come poi abbiamo fatto anche oggi, perché poi nei convegni si fa così, è molto più difficile che questo processo arrivi, perché non è più nell'esperienza quotidiana vostra non lo è mai stata, ma ormai non lo è più nemmeno nella nostra esperienza quotidiana. Oggi tutti, anzi oggi mi avete onorato di un'attenzione di cui vi ringrazio, ma oggi anche a lezione, oggi anche ai convegni, oggi anche ai seminari, stiamo tutti che ascoltiamo, ma nello stesso tempo facciamo altro. Quindi dobbiamo cercare di costruire questa capacità. Ho fatto danni? Next. Dobbiamo cercare di costruire questa capacità dialogica, sia se facciamo giornalismo, sia se facciamo didattica, sia se facciamo politica, qualsiasi altra cosa.
Grazie. Io volevo chiederle, appunto, lei sta parlando molto di dialogo a tutti i livelli. A livello giornalistico, crede che veramente quello che è stato fino adesso il mainstream, i grandi giornali, le grandi televisioni, vogliano veramente fomentare questo dialogo? Perché sì, magari lanciano sondaggi e chiedono cosa ne pensi, ma non si preoccupano quasi mai di entrare in questo dialogo, di avere quel feedback, quando invece internet è puro feedback. Noi vogliamo parlare, ma vogliamo essere ascoltati, vogliamo anche essere rivalutati. Non so, magari è molto semplice come ragionamento, però mi pare che è una cosa che le grandi testate giornalistiche facilmente a livello di infrastruttura possono fare. E anche un giornalista, ormai siamo tutti blogger, siamo opinionisti su Twitter, ma nessuno lo fa, o molto poco. Non so cosa ne pensa.
Ma credo che se non fanno questo moriranno. Quindi non hanno nessuna voglia di farlo, non hanno nessuna voglia di farlo per motivi molto semplici e tutto sommato comprensibili. Non hanno capito come ci guadagnano e non hanno capito come si fa. Quindi, poveracci, non li dobbiamo guardare con astio e risentimento, li dobbiamo, ripeto, non parliamo dei giornalisti, parliamo dei professori universitari. Io lo dico in continuazione ai miei colleghi, stiamo praticando un metodo di insegnamento morto. Noi diciamo che i nostri studenti sono più ignoranti, ma probabilmente è soltanto che abbiamo una modalità di costruzione del dialogo che non è più quella che funziona. Così come non funziona facendo il professore universitario, cioè se io che faccio il professore universitario mi metto in discussione, posso incominciare a parlare dei giornalisti. Tu mi hai chiesto dei giornalisti e allora ti rispondo sei giornalisti. Anche loro, se non capiscono che quello che stanno facendo, ripeto, è un dato molto semplice. Io sto conducendo, come tanti di voi, tante ricerche che dicono questo, ma la gente non è che non si informa molto di più, confusa rispetto a prima, perché prima diceva, l'ha detto la televisione, c'è scritto sul giornale, aveva un potere certificativo di fede, di fiducia fortissima. Oggi nessuno di noi dice, nemmeno nostra nonna dice più una cosa del genere, insomma, no? E allora, se io non capisco che la mia vera essenza di giornalista è ricostruire questo patto, quello dei semiologi, Umberto Eco, tanto chiama come dire, il patto con il consumatore, con il lettore, con l'ascoltatore, con il pubblico. E questo patto oggi non può essere, come dire, soltanto definito dal marketing. I gattini, il Little Cat, la Molière desnude, i Sunshine, è marketing. Easy marketing, perché tanti click, tutti quanti vanno lì e fanno click, però siccome poi gli esseri umani sono bizzarri, noi stessi clicchiamo sui gattini e sulle donnine nude, ma mentre lo facciamo diciamo ma che schifo, non dovrebbe essere così il giornalismo, insomma, no? Ecco, allora quello che dobbiamo fare è alzare di livello. Per alzare di livello bisogna fare quello che tu dici, capire realmente la logica dialogica e capire davvero che tu con il pubblico ti devi alleare, ma non perché lo devi persuadere, lo devi, come dire, comprare, eccetera, eccetera, perché altrimenti non entri in sintonia e se non entri in sintonia muori, no? Quindi è un problema banalmente di esistenza. Ripeto, oggi c'è molta consapevolezza, c'è molta poca consapevolezza, perché ne parlavamo a colazione con Victor, perché sostanzialmente chi insegna giornalismo insegna un vecchio giornalismo, chi pratica giornalismo è abituato a praticarlo in quel modo lì, e soprattutto nessuno di noi ha spiegato ad un editore, a Murdoch, come fare soldi in questo modo qui. no? Ieri José mi parlava di esperienze interessanti che stanno nascendo in Spagna di crowdfunding. Quello per esempio è una strada, non so se sarà la strada, però quella è una strada perché in qualche modo io cittadino, io citizen, non divento soltanto esigente in maniera un po' querola, tu sei italiano, tutte queste parole le capisci, ma gli altri no, poi gliele traduci tu. Un po' pretenziosa, ma se ci metto soldi incomincio a diventare anch'io editore. Questo è un altro aspetto interessante di quello che stai dicendo tu. Io non sono soltanto il cittadino che deve essere informato, ma io divento anche produttore, perché attraverso la mia bacheca di Facebook faccio andare in giro quello che voglio, ma anche perché metto i soldi, non perché vado tutti i giorni a comprarmi il País all'edicola, ma perché metto i soldi su progetti che mi interessano. Questo fa nascere tutta una serie enorme di problemi di alta natura, ma su quelli ci fermiamo.
Bien, deixamos se hai algunha pregunta máis para a sesión da 1:30 para intentar cumplir o programa. Agradecemos moito a Carlo Sorrentino que nos fixera este deseño do estado da cuestión e este marco inicial e seguimos agora coas experiencias, damos paso a Mari McCarthy e na seguinte sesión. Moitas gracias, agradecemos a presencia de Sorrentino con forte aplauso, se lles parece.
Gracias.
And presentation.
Moi ben, despois da excelente conferencia do profesor Carlo Sorrentino, que nos situou un pouquiño na nova perspectiva que está traendo Internet, imos continuar con Mari McCarthy, que é a directora da National Sculpture Factory en Cork, en Irlanda, que ela nos vai explicar un pouquinho máis en detalle o que é este proxecto, pero, bueno, é unha especie de organización que proporciona, pois, acollemento a artistas, digamos, a infraestructura e o trasfondo necesario para a producción cultural. So, Mary, welcome to Santiago.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us when you want.
Thank you. And again, I apologize that my presentation will be in English, so I hope you will understand, but Manuel will help me if I have a problem. I'm very grateful for the invitation here this morning to this beautiful city and region, because in Ireland we have a fascination with this culture because of our long-term kind of cultural connections. So I think there's lots of dialogue between our cultures in a real way. This morning I propose to talk to you about, I suppose, the role of culture in storytelling, as Professor Carlos mentioned, and in articulating a set of values in a very real way for countries both nationally and globally. And I guess the role of journalism and the media in that is one that is quite a large and significant part. Initially, I'm going to talk about the organization that I am director of. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk about Culture Ireland, an organization which I chair the board of, which promotes Ireland globally and was set up for very strategic political and cultural reasons in the middle of our kind of economic boom in 2005. But to start, I don't know if many of you have ever been to Cork, but I'm sure some of you at least have been to Dublin and other parts of Ireland. Cork is the second city way down south, just quite immediately north of us here. It's the second city in the Republic and the third city in the All-Ireland region. It's got a population of about 350,000 in the city. It's a big university city. We have many, many students, and we have a big creative population, many artists, because the geographic region is quite beautiful. And we also have many festivals, cultural festivals. So it's considered a very cultural region. The city is run by a municipal authority, which is how the structures are run in Ireland, from local government. And local government has some responsibility for culture, probably like some of the cultural agencies here, but it is a political agency. But culture would be part of its remit in the same way as environment. If you give the public parks, there is an argument in Ireland, you also need mandatorily to provide cultural infrastructure. Cork as a city has many international companies. We have the Apple headquarters, the European Apple headquarters, and many American multinationals. So the city is very international in its foreign direct investment. And this is something that's really interesting for the cultural sector. In particular, this very highly mobilized, highly globalized audience who work in our city for short periods of time, particularly in some of the new animation companies and digital companies that are now emerging. This is the building that I work in. It's an old tramway depot. And in these buildings were set up, and many organizations were set up by artists in Cork in the late 1980s. And this was a time of mass unemployment in our city because two of the major American companies, Ford and Dunlop's, closed their international European headquarters in our city because of globalization. So as a reaction to that, that was the last kind of major crisis before the current one, arts organizations began to innovate and set up new companies as part of the cultural identity and the brand identity of Cork as a city. Cork was European Capital of Culture in 2005, about 20 years after this kind of cultural explosion. This is the inside of our building. It's a large artist facility where artists make material works. Quite interesting in relation to the digital. We're obsessed with reality and with material and with objects. And the relationship of that to the digital is one that we are now fully embracing through projects. But ordinarily, artists rent space. We're subsidized by national government. And we, like everybody, like probably many of your cultural organizations, have taken extreme funding cuts in the last 7 years. This was the building when it was taken over, large, empty, old tramway depot owned by the city, used really rather derelict. So the city, in many cities in Ireland, use cultural organizations for regeneration, to repossess parts of the city that are derelict. Now you can see it's a very thriving kind of cultural facility. I suppose it began with 4 artists setting it up and slowly became professional over 20 years. But it's much more than just a cultural production facility. It really has this role of bringing the public in, which is why we have this big signage on the outside of the building. We organize many events which engages with many publics. And it's quite interesting, in recent years, we find it very hard to exactly know our audience. With the use of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we can put on events and I will recognize only 20% of the audience. That's a little disconcerting sometimes because you have to question loyalty. Where are your loyal followers? In the year 2000, in a room, I would have known 80% of the audience. So there's an extreme shift for us as an organization in terms of the audiences who are interested and who engage in our events. And that's a challenge, I think, for arts organizations globally, how to build loyalty in the digital age. How do you track audiences? And in a way, rather than see it as something negative, I see it as something very positive, because your reach is really global, and also new people give your organization new meaning. There's a lot of co-creation and co-production. I suppose in 2007, the Irish economy, like much of the global economy, but particularly the Irish economy, started to slow down. And in 2009, we had, as you know, and as Spain also has had major effects, a major economic crisis. Government funding for culture was cut between 30% and 40% for everybody very, very quickly. As an organization that works with artists, what do you then do, actually? We had to really think about who do we engage with, how do we engage with them, and how do we talk to other professionals. So my organization decided that artists are our first audience, but that we would think about other communities who actually were directly also impacted by the recession: architects, engineers, the construction industry, our communities, that we would start to engage with them and build some solidarity, actually, for the role of artists. We were aware that at the time of crisis, when unemployment went from 4% to about 15% very quickly, that actually we had to work with the public, so the public would not resent art funding, because several other industries, including education, were cut by 40–50% funding. So we had to strategically think, we must not make the public hostile to our activities. So my organization started to work with, in this case, the Venice Biennale of Architecture. So we started to have these global connections to bring significant projects to Cork, to make sure that the national and local audience had access to international projects. We take a very broad definition of sculpture. So on occasion, we transform our whole building into cinema and fine art projects. In this case, you can see we collaborate with international film festivals and present digital work. Sculpture might sound like a fixed term to you. It might sound like we mean objects in public spaces. The definition of sculpture reaches to performance, sound art, digital work, work that's created purely for the digital space. You can see how we transform the space actively into a space where we worked with international artist Phil Collins, who's based in Berlin, not the musician Phil Collins, but the film artist Phil Collins. We can easily transform the space into something other, which engages masses of new audiences. We also made links with universities in Colorado, Denver in America, and also in Wales to run these massive workshops with students globally attending Cork to learn processes that were becoming forgotten, in this case, iron casting. All of our artists, as I think your artists here, we would make the case, are researchers. They're obsessed with material, and that sort of material knowledge is transferable to other parts of the economy. Professor Carlos mentioned imagination. We use the word curiosity a lot. We've run a lot of projects with young people to explore materials, because people are so fixated with screens all the time. Children are all the time on media. So we've run large projects where we encourage young people to make things, to make objects in new materials. And those materials may be aerogel, which is a scientific aeronautical material, or we may look at 3D printing, or we may look at something like iron casting. We look at all the kind of processes of material making. I suppose attracting large audiences into a workplace is important, because it encourages people to really see the value of art making. I think a society or a place where things are not made is a poorer society, because it's important that we understand how things are made, the processes of, be it stone carving, metal making. All of these processes are important to kind of track and to support. This is an example of a work that was made in our facility, which was, its budget is €100,000, and it's just recently been cited in the public domain near Cork City. It's by an artist called Alex Pentax, whose father is Hungarian, whose mother is English, and he lives in Cork. This project started by research about a Choctaw Indian contribution to Ireland in 1845, when we had our huge famine, which was the time when our population got depleted from 8.5 million to where it's about now, 4.7 million. We're a very small country. And this sculpture, the artist started to research the place where this sculpture was going to be put, and discovered this narrative, this story, and decided to make reference to that donation with these feathers. This is an example of storytelling in a contemporary way, that the project will hint at some historical reference in the past, and the story is being picked up globally by journalists. Especially in the American population, obviously, because of the historical connection. We were inundated with cameras, with journalists, with social media, wanting to know more about this connection with this incredibly gift in 1845 to this very small place in Ireland, which was an act of generosity. So art projects very often serve to reconnect these historical moments and to make these new global connections between different populations. I think you also have here in Spain this percent for art schemes. Whenever we have public buildings or public projects in Ireland, 1% up to 60,000 or 100,000 is given to artists to make projects. I think you have that here. During the recession, there was less of that because, of course, there was less capital projects, and also because staff numbers were so depleted, there was nobody in the public agencies to manage these projects. But now they're beginning to re-emerge, and my agency would advocate for those to be funded. You see the image here on the right. This is a new material called rock salt, very ancient material. It's salt. But one of our very contemporary artists have started to make these amazing bowls from this very old materials. We produce work for exhibition in London. Our audience is small, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the second part of the presentation. Our national audience for culture is limited because of being a small country. So the global connection is really significant for us. In 2009, when a lot of people were unemployed, less so in Cork, but nationally, we decided that we would run a series of lectures which were not aimed at artists. They were really aimed at engineers, scientists, other professionals. And we organized them every lunchtime for 2 months in the summer period. So you knew you could come to a lecture at 1 o'clock. You would be back at your desk at 2 o'clock, and you would have had 40 minutes of a discussion on a creative topic. The reason was, again, to engage audiences in our processes and to build new relationships, and also to keep this dialogue, to keep dialogue going. Things were bad, but there's no shortage of ideas. People are continually generating ideas. Just on Friday night, we worked on a big digital project called Cork Ignite. I have an image of it here, where we worked with a British artist, Simon McCune, to produce a 3D 30-minute projection work on a significant building in the city. This was using the newest technology. This artist, Simon McCune, normally works with Apple technology, delivering computer apps and working in the software and gaming industry. But we commissioned him on a project of 120,000 to produce a project that would last for 30 minutes in Cork on Culture Night. Over 8,000 people saw the work live on the streets, but over 2,000 watched it online, and already the YouTube hits are exceeding the thousands and the Instagrams. This is another image of it. It was a very highly complex set of projections. Those projects are important because they have big connections and they live long beyond the reality in the YouTube space. Also, but I would argue that while they live long, the experience of receiving a project live collectively is a really important part, and something that I think the digital space is one that struggles to make that bridge with the kind of reality space with the live collective experience. Okay, so I've talked about how we create other connections. So I suppose my organization has taken funding cuts of 30%, but we have tried to really find other ways of being resilient. Our artists have never been unemployed in that period. Our facility has been full because they have worked other ways to make projects happen. They have made new partnerships. They have spoken to communities outside of the direct communities that they ordinarily worked in. I would say we've had to change how we do business almost completely, in that we've had to stop just talking to ourselves. We have to talk to different publics. And I think that's been a very important shift in the last 5 years for cultural organisations in Ireland. We've had to form new relationships. We cannot take it for granted that people are interested. We've had to work very hard with the press and the media to maintain a positive image of what culture can actually achieve in times of great national despondence, national depression, national lack of confidence. And I guess the lack of confidence in Ireland was twofold. Once, there was a global economic crash, but also the Irish situation was particularly built on a property boom, which was a local situation. It was one that Irish people colluded with, and perhaps colluded with government with, because we as a nation like to own property. We're sort of property obsessed. So the situation was the crisis in Ireland was a double-fold one. I suppose to talk about the national picture, if you think of Ireland, you know, what do you think of? You probably think things like Guinness, Patrick's Day, maybe, perhaps U2, perhaps even Riverdance, which is an interesting phenomenon. So Ireland has a lot of these cultural brands. Obviously, we have our writers, Joyce, Beckett, Wilde, Yeats, a lot of historical figures. So the role of the artist in Ireland is always a significant role. Our president is currently an artist. He's a writer. The artist is seen to be somebody that's respected, a worker. In Ireland, if you're an artist, if you earn up to €40,000, you pay no tax. That is the only country in the world to have this special category. And that applies to artists that work in different media, writing, digital space. You have to present a case to government, and if you are a full-time artist, you pay no tax up to 40,000. That was unlimited, and that was in 2009, it was capped at 40,000. Previously, you could have earned €1 million and paid no tax as an artist. But I have to say, the national wage of an artist in Ireland is €15,000, so it actually is very low. So people really don't reach this threshold. And I should say, living expenses in Ireland are quite high. They are, I think, significantly higher than in your country. Probably the average wage in Ireland would be about €2,500 a month. The average accommodation in our city for an apartment would be about €1,000 a month. So it's a rather expensive economy. Or the price of a coffee, which is probably a good barometer, is about €2.50. Other kind of strategies are funding nationally comes from government, but again, the artist has an important place, and culture is very important in our global identity. It's really seen to be part of this storytelling what Professor Carlos talked about. It's part of that kind of strategy for promoting Ireland. Previous to 2005, our main ways of promoting Ireland was through our embassies, and I think you have that here too, your embassies abroad. They promoted Ireland largely internationally. Ireland owns 2 pieces of cultural infrastructure, one in Paris and one now in New York, for actually showcasing Irish artists. And obviously, the cultural sector is always global. It's always traveling, making new connections. So artists were always traveling internationally itself. Culture Ireland was set up in 2005. So during this time of economic wealth, and it was largely set up to coherently promote Ireland abroad. 44 million people in the United States of America claim to have an Irish connection. That's just in one place, to have an Irish ethnic kind of connection. So during the boom times, which was actually very short, it was from 2000 to 2007 in reality, it was 7 years, it was felt that the goodwill towards Ireland internationally was decreasing. People were not as attracted to the concept of being Irish. And in some cases, the diaspora have a very different concept of Ireland than maybe those of us that live in Ireland. There can be this disconnect. But the government felt that this diaspora worldwide needed to be reconnected for political reasons, for economic reasons, but also for the sustainability of the image of Ireland abroad. More and more people were coming to Ireland to live, and less Irish people during that period were travelling abroad to live. That radically changed in 2009, when 50,000 young people were then leaving Ireland to go primarily this time to Australia and Canada and New Zealand. So new diasporas are being set up in new continents, where previously America was our biggest region for people to go to work. So Culture Ireland's role is political and cultural, but strategically to have autonomy actually from the government. And that's a very important part of Culture Ireland's work, that it remains independent from political views of what culture may be. Its goals are to promote culture worldwide, a large and ambitious role. And we've had several connections, particularly with Galician culture, with Celtic connections. Right this year, if any of you were at the opening of the Edinburgh Festival, our artists combined together actually at the grand opening with this Celtic Connection Music Festival. But the role is strategic to build goodwill for Ireland. So right now, Culture Ireland would organise many events internationally and showcase Ireland at key international events. Its goals are co-creation. Its values are to respect the local culture. So it's not that we come in and just present Irish arts on its own. It's really to look at what is the context of what's happening in the ground. To present work, and as Professor Carlos mentioned, to create space for dialogue. And that has been one of the greatest, I suppose, successes of Culture Ireland, that it's managed to create a space for communication between different cultures, and actually to discuss and unpack some of those complexities, that we have similarities, but also it's possible to talk about our cultural differences. Culture can create the space to have these very difficult conversations. And perhaps now, more than ever, with the European crisis of the refugee crisis, we need to be looking at this responsibility. What is the role that we have as responsible cultural agents? Culture Ireland, like many agencies in Ireland, started off with small budgets. Around 2007, we had a budget of about 5 million, with an extra budget of 7 million to create this big project called Imagine Ireland in the United States. And I can't overemphasize how important America is to Ireland in terms of foreign direct investment. So this is a direct link of culture attracting American industry into our country to work. 71% of people who come to Ireland come for culture. Landscape is the first attraction. Culture and the arts is the second. Foreign direct investment companies claim that they set up in Ireland because of the creative industry feeling. If a country that is creative will attract more people who want to work in the digital space, particularly. We've had many global conferences about looking at how can we rebuild Ireland's reputation. And all of the kind of brand ambassadors for Ireland talked about culture being really the kind of primary engager of a gateway to Ireland. It's a place to tell that story, a place to have a conversation. And out of the cultural sector, many global digital companies have now set up in Ireland. We have a digital hub where maybe some of you are also connected with, which is based in Dublin. Many Portuguese in particular setups who work in the digital industries have set up there because it's low in bureaucracy, not so much paperwork, and very high in digital strategy culturally. So the cultural industries in Ireland are seen very much as part of our brand and as part of rebuilding our reputation. And we feel as Irish people that we do need to rebuild our reputation. We cannot live on our past artists alone. We must encourage continuous creativity, the evolving creativity. What's interesting about Riverdance, and I don't know if any of you have ever seen Riverdance, it's phenomenally huge in China right now. But actually, Riverdance is not created directly by the Irish population. It's created by the diaspora, the sons and grandchildren of Irish people who moved to Chicago and Boston. Michael Flatley is the child of Irish grandparents and is now back living in Ireland. He's reclaimed his status as being an Irish artist. Professor Carlos talked about David Putnam, or mentioned David Putnam in his presentation. David Putnam lives in just near our city, Cork, and operates a digital industry from Ireland. Ireland has become a place where you can do digital business creatively, living rurally. And I think that's been a very important strategy of the Irish government to improve digital access and technology so that actually you don't have to be in the centre. I live in the second city, but I'm 1.5 hours from London. I'm actually 3 hours nearly from my capital city by transport. So connections are formed in other places. I'm 1 hour 30 from Amsterdam. From Amsterdam, I can pretty much go anywhere. I'm 5.5 hours from New York. So the positioning is, the connections are depending on how fast you can get anywhere. But now, as Putnam manages a global lecturing and a strategy from West Cork, which is 1.5 hours from a city, it proves that we don't have to be anywhere in particular. The current situation in Ireland is still very fragile culturally. I'm sure you're hearing some stories of improvement. Yes, it is much better. Unemployment is dropping. It's dropped about 5%. Funding for the arts is still stable. And I must say, throughout the whole recession, the public stayed very loyal to the cultural producers and to artists. Many festivals were created that were free, and the public never really, I suppose, attacked the artists for kind of taking money. And again, the press had quite a big role in that kind of telling the story as it was. What are the challenges for us now culturally in Ireland? I would say the challenges are, how do we stay being authentic? Professor Carlos talked this morning about the storytelling, but how do you stay having an authentic narrative in quite a complex world? How do we encourage people to experience projects live, to really experience the real world as lived? The situation globally is still very precarious. So we in Culture Ireland have to still work very hard at presenting Irish artists abroad to build new audiences. Building audience is important when you live in a country of 4.7 million, because for the artists, they need to reach much, much larger populations. It's a very competitive world. People are creating and co-creating work, which is very, very high quality globally everywhere. It's interesting that Facebook was mentioned quite a bit this morning. And one of our next programs globally is working with Facebook. They're headquartered in Dublin. And right now we have a program where there are 5 artists working with Facebook in their company. This was really difficult to achieve because Facebook are paranoid about copyright and safety. But actually, they are beginning to think about this strategy of materiality. How do you make things that are virtual real? And they have made this exchange that they will fund an artist for 3 months, the average Facebook salary. And believe me, the average Facebook salary is very good. So they give you as an artist the full Facebook salary, a computer, a phone, complete access to the free food. They say that you put on £10 in the first 3 months because you eat everything. It's free food all day long. And the notion is that the artist must do some exchange with the Facebook population. And they've started this strategy called Express Yourself. They recognize that their staff are very creative. Many of them play instruments. Many of them make movies. Many of them are involved in digital animation. So it really is to help the staff bring their own creativity to the fore. So of course it's a strategy, but actually for the artists it's very interesting because they get to use all the newest technologies and I suppose materials that are available to them. I suppose in the cultural sector in Ireland, I would say we have been political. We have worked very closely with our local politicians, our national politicians, and increasingly with the European Commission to really push for the role of the artist in society. I took part in this new narrative for Europe last year, which Spain was well represented with your artists, to really look what is the role of the creative sector? What is the role of the media in creating the space for free dialogue? And this year has been particularly globally challenging, that we need to keep the space for free conversation. We need to keep the space to be critical. And you, as people who work possibly in the digital space and in the media space, really have a responsibility and need our support to create real space, to tell real stories. This organisation, incfa.ie, is National Campaign for the Arts. And you will see on that website a strategy that we are just now presenting to government pre our next election for how they should maintain support for the artists. It's really important that we increase political awareness. And actually the media has quite a big role in that, about building awareness of the reach of culture and the fact that, as I said, culture creates a space for discussing complex issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for so inspiring conference. Tempo para preguntas. Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta que quiera hacer. Bueno, pues fago unha pregunta todos primeiro para romper un pouco o xeo. I was really interested in the role of diaspora, because so in Galicia we have also a very, very strong diaspora, especially in South America and also in Europe, the rest of Spain and so on. So, and we have the same problem with all generations of diaspora who has a particular view on Galicia, which is not the view that Galicians have, we live here. So it's about a divide between cultural production in Galicia and Galician cultural production in diaspora. So I would like to explain more about how you can reconnect the old generations of diaspora and people of nowadays in your country.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting challenge how to shift people's ideological and mental image of your country if they live out of the country for a long period of time. And I suppose projects like Culture Ireland has engaged in global programs. So in the case of 2007, particularly in the United States, we initiated a program called Imagine Ireland. We really wanted to call it Reimagine Ireland. And what we did there then was present really contemporary practice, sometimes in conversation with more historical practice. So if we were showcasing river dance, we would also showcase some really abstract contemporary dance at the same time and create conversations between the two, because actually the expression is not so different in one way. And it was about engaging people to think about culture as evolving. Other ways that we did it, I think, which have been very successful, we have this, if you have a chance to ever look up this Irish musical act called The Gloaming, Gloaming. It's 5 musicians, 2 of which are American and 3 of which are Irish, who have made Irish traditional music really exquisitely contemporary. It now has, every time it travels globally, it gets audiences of thousands and thousands of young people who now think that this music is a really contemporary art form. When they play Sydney Opera House, it has a double fact. The people who may not be able to get there who are Irish are really proud that their Irish musicians are in this big iconic opera house. And also the people who go there hear Irish music being produced at the very highest contemporary classical level. So it moves, it's an evolving story. We've also managed to do it by, we bring international press to Ireland. So Culture Ireland would support press visits so that they see what happens. And I suppose our artists are our greatest ambassadors. We do a lot of talks programs where artists will go and talk about their practice. Yes, of course, traditionally people see Ireland possibly as a place where it's traditional music, traditional dance, traditional theatre, but we're growingly presenting and winning awards for very contemporary practice.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Moi ben, pois entón continuamos, subimos facer un pequeno descanso e continuamos ca vindeira conferencia que é de Víctor San Pedro ás 12:30.
I think it is hard.
Okay.
I think it is hard. You think it is
Yeah. I was very interested and I was not wrong because I want to use this thing.